Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, is this still Yu-Gi-Oh? Yes, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Let's hop in here and see what our new dailies are. We still don't have a play in solo mode, which is kind of surprising. So that's going to keep everything kind of simplistic here, as far as just need to play ranked. And I don't know if the game itself has maybe just decided I've done enough solo modes. All those secret packs I unlocked are gone again as of Wednesday. So let's just open this and see what we've got here. For the accountability section, I played a little bit of Lego DC Supervillains and finished the main story, but it feels like there's some post-game DLC main story that has like 5 more levels. I'm literally nowhere as far as just all the open world collectible stuff, so as far as all the gold bricks and red bricks and collectibles and characters unlocking, I'm at like 24%. The story is very rough, I would say, at least in the main game of Lego DC Super Villains. It really feels like it should have been broken into 2 games, even if they were slightly shorter games. One where you would potentially focus on like super villains of just Batman and super villains of just Superman, or even just half of the supervillain rogues gallery of DC, instead of having people show up that are just enemies that just kind of villains that you can play as that show up for like 1 level and then they disappear, and then they show up at the very end of the main story and you won't even have remembered that they existed. It's just too many characters, frankly, and that's been the growing problem with the Telltale Lego games overall, is that they are these just ever-increasing minifig games with more and more minifigs. So yeah, I have a lot more work to do there. I'm also still just fighting with my Wi-Fi for 2 separate reasons. There is an argument to buying a new Wi-Fi router that would be on the list. I saw the #1 Wi-Fi router for OpenWRT or DDWRT. But the #2 Wi-Fi router on that same list is the one I already own, and so it's not really a major step forward. I think I probably have what it would retroactively be called a Wi-Fi 5 standard Wi-Fi router, and stepping up to a new one would be just moving to a Wi-Fi 6. I don't think it's a 6E, and like there might be an argument against into moving to a different brand with a different chipset, assuming it is a different chipset. And there might be an argument that maybe I've just flashed and rebooted my router far too many times, and that is part of the problem. There is definitely at least one setting that seems to have been burnt directly into the firmware of the chip and is undoable. So, yeah, in that I changed the MAC addresses to the Wi-Fi access points, and that seems like that was a one-way street without really any warning. Okay, we have a 3000 here, so I think our move is to probably play this. Add this to the hand. Summon this. But yeah, mostly I spent most of yesterday, once again, not doing YouTube stuff. There is slight hope that in the next few weeks, this medium emergency will fix itself, and I will be able to get back to very much more consistently recording on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and potentially also recording or scheduling on Saturdays and Sundays to get more of a consistent experience overall. Let's see if this can let me do this. So I may have played pretty well there. That being said, I think I did the wrong move here. Yeah, I did. I should have had the boar, and I summoned the wrong person on the first step there. Otherwise, I could have directly attacked, which would have done slightly more damage. It's, in the long run, probably not going to affect too much, but I did play out of order in the turn now. So he has 2 opportunities plus the 1 card he draws for 3 opportunities in his hand, and then he has this character on the field who is just a dark magician and doesn't have any effect abilities, although he does have a bunch of support abilities. Inherently, what you would have wanted to do, even now they could do this, is they could go back and look at some of the first generation cards that are normal characters and add a lot more support characters, support cards to those characters. And for some things, I bet that's the case, but for a lot of things, I suspect that is probably not the case. Man-eating insect is one that comes to mind, and I doubt that there's enough support cards, if there are any, for, I think it's called man-eating insect, that would justify making a bug deck and trying for all of that. Okay. So I'm gonna summon this, and then seems like he can potentially activate something. That being said, I don't know if there's too much I need to worry about here. Don't activate that. And then just attack. We are actually trying to win at the moment to get up in ranked. Let's go ahead and start talking about some main video game news stuff and things, since as far as accountability section, I could say yes, I'm still playing far too many mobile phone games, still trying to get through the Ragnar break is what it's called on Destiny Child, which takes a lot of focus. Like, the Ragnar breaks are particularly the point where you need to just have your phone always open and always taking on another raid fight. But yeah, there's really not too much to say there. And if anything, right now, even though the Ragnar break is taking a lot of time up, it's not actually demanding that much as far as unlocking 2 new characters, which is usually what happens. This is really just unlocking 1 new character and the skin at the very end for the new character. Apparently Steam, on top of changing its rules where you can only have 2 trailers at the far left at the beginning of a page, has made some slight changes in other places. It may very well be a case that Steam as a website really just can't make a major change. It does definitely not feel like they want to make major changes, because obviously they're slowly getting rid of the blue towards more of a black background and visual theme, and they're doing it in extremely slow measures over the course of years. But Steam games can now be searched for by developer, franchise, and tag. With the newest update, now Steam now supports things that players have been trying to search by all along. Let's see if we can read the full Steam update instead of just sticking with what was GameDeveloper.com there. Developers and publishers have in the past been at odds in some cases where one side is making it either intentionally or unintentionally very difficult to search by the other side, or you'll have cases often where there's a publisher that makes it impossible to just search for search by the developer. So you click on the developer's name and then you go to the publisher's Steam page, the newer publisher pages that are fancier looking, and then it shows you a whole bunch of games from that publisher but not made by that developer. And franchise itself can obviously be very helpful particularly if a franchise is split between multiple people. Inherently, though, I feel like this is all going to be stuff that you put into, that the publishers mostly put into their forms that go into the database that's being searched here. It does say that it also has better handling of typing mistakes, which would be nice. But yeah, unless they're going to let users or have some paid employee at Valve make sure data is correct, it's going to be very easy for a publisher to say a game that is in a franchise actually isn't in a franchise and just not fill in that square. It's going to be very easy for a publisher to put their name as the developer and try and lie in that way too. And inherently, talking about just like small improvements, this is literally just improvements to the search box on Steam. So it does make a lot of sense that you wouldn't make a big announcement around that, but it also kind of makes some sense that they should potentially hold back big changes for some big event. You'd think every summer, instead of a Steam summer sale and having mini games and having the whole themes and visuals change, that would be the point to say, hey, you know what, during this Steam summer sale we're also rolling out our new and improved search, so try that out and we'll give you some free tokens for our token shop now that they've introduced the token shop where the tokens are effectively valueless, or at least have no cash value that you can't cash it out. So yeah, it is kind of weird to just roll it out in the middle of nothing. Although perhaps by rolling it out in the middle of nothing, you also are creating a situation where it doesn't get overwhelmed. Speaking of overwhelming things, here we have YouTube creators putting out a tweet saying, "Protect yourself from phishing emails. Make sure to verify your sender's email before clicking any links, and never provide any personal sensitive information or YouTube credentials via email." Get the full rundown here. First of all, you have to admit, though, that Google Alphabet owns Gmail, so YouTube not working closer with Gmail to prevent phishing in the first place is a problem. And there is also a new system that Gmail is adopting to give people that want to pay for it, I believe, blue check marks inside of emails for corporations and businesses. So they are moving towards a verification blue check mark system, although in all honesty, perhaps they shouldn't use blue check marks, because now in people's minds blue check marks mean something negative, and in the Gmail aspect it is definitely going to be more of a item that actually means somebody has somewhat been verified. Google has also rolled out passkeys, which I believe is part of the FIDO2 standard, which is this idea of getting rid of passcodes and passwords altogether, and instead having phones with either face detection or biometrics be the thing you use to unlock. I'm not sure if more simplistic unlock patterns, or just if your phone is completely unlocked pop-up prompts that we've seen in the past, are going to be allowed in passkeys. And inherently you are running into this situation where a lot of websites, particularly like banking websites, will not ever bother unless they are forced by law to adopt something like passkeys. And so then you're going to be using passkeys for maybe Facebook and Twitter and Google products and Amazon.com, and that's going to be about it. It's going to be like the top 100 websites are going to support it, and that's it. And then that is just going to ever increase the division between the main top 100 websites that most people visit and the rest of the internet that is ever increasingly becoming this wasteland in which people are not ever pushed towards those websites. And bigger and bigger shares of people's attention are going to go towards those top 100 websites and those major corporations, and inherently there's been no balancing factor at all in the internet. It went directly to a situation where big corporations didn't think the internet was going to catch on, and they ignored it, and as soon as they saw it did catch on, they swooped in and they took control over it and monetized it completely. And very much changed what the internet was versus what the internet is. or what the World Wide Web was versus what the World Wide Web is. It's more the World Wide Web that has changed drastically. The internet itself, being just kind of the backbone of connectivity, is a little bit more stable. You still have a lot of services like Internet Relay Chat and Discord and things that are a little bit more diverse. I don't know if this is yet another story, or if this is just maybe a repeat of a story that's already been admitted, or a continuation of a story that's already been admitted. But Riot is paying over 1,500 women as part of a gender discrimination settlement. Activision Blizzard has also made a 6-figure payments to those involved in a sexual harassment and discrimination lawsuit. So yeah, did this page load all the way? Seems like it's just abruptly at the end here. Yeah, I don't know how you can really get away from the fact that there definitely was some shenanigans happening at Riot, but noticeably you also have to realize this is GameDeveloper.com doing a very bad journalist thing here, where they're talking about Riot here, and they barely are writing a paragraph about Riot, and then they change the subject completely and start talking about Activision Blizzard. So, I mean, that's definitely pushing an agenda and just not being a good journalist. It's yellow journalism, frankly, to always try and twist things to pushing in an agenda that you obviously have. Okay, let's try this again. This may have been a mistake. But yeah, it's a real shame that there is some pretty obvious truth to some of the accusations. A lot of the accusations that have been made about video game companies being a boys' club. And frankly, it wasn't always that way, or it didn't feel like it was always that way. And there's almost like this slight backslide where you had a bunch of hippies originally running a company like Atari, and in the hippie mentality there was a lot of love and respect for women, and then it seems like that culture, which was arguably problematic, to use a phrase, still, but that culture seemed to get replaced with what would have been called the yuppies, I think, and then eventually just evolved into the 80s cocaine cowboys, boys club type stuff. And weirdly, I have to blame colleges for that more than anything. Very high level Ivy League colleges with fraternities and things like that. Like, because you really, in the era of Atari, and this is perhaps just a narrative that I'm making up in my own head, but my thought certainly is, in the era of Atari, you had a bunch of hippies that dropped out of college or never went to college, and then they got replaced by a bunch of college people. Often I imagine there was like one investor, and this perhaps is maybe one of the best examples of the problem with investors in the first place, shareholders or otherwise. There's almost certainly like one rich investor that said, all right, we need to start hiring college people. And as soon as they hired college people that were legacies of their own fraternity, and they started hiring people more like the investors, who would, then you start to have this like major shift towards sexism that I just don't feel like was as much in existence. Of course, it could also be a perception issue on my part. It could be that there was a fairly large amount of sexism even in the hippie days of that first generation of game companies like Atari. There was definitely a level of sexual liberation in the hippie movement, but often I think there was there was also a lot of thought of treating people as equals and consent, I think, during that sexual liberation. So my thought there is that if you were hanging out with a bunch of hippies, yes, they may ask you, do you want to go smoke some weed and skinny dip, that you might get asked that, but you were certainly allowed to say no. Whereas the 80s cocaine cowboys was just blatant, hey, skirt, go get me a coffee type stuff, without the respect. At least that's been how I think about it. But maybe I'm just totally wrong on that. I may just be rambling. But I would say I do suspect that a push towards putting women in their place by pushing towards more conservative attitudes and conservative dress in women tends to be a typical way of limiting their choices and their ability to say no to things. But yeah. Okay. We've got one chance here to win. And if this messes up, we can still potentially win here. Summon this. Activate this. Banish this. Let's go ahead and just activate this to get rid of it. Go ahead and play this. Now, inevitably, if you can summon anything that's 1200 or more, he would win. And I think he's just won. Not unless I did something, say, like this. I guess what we're inherently looking for here is if we could, say, summon this one into an attack position here, then activate his ability to banish another 4 cards, But this is not going to work the way I want it to work, almost certainly, because this ability is not going to happen. And so then what you're looking for is to potentially summon this. That's 2. That's 1. That's 4. And let's see. Just end the turn there. So I'm in a weird position as far as this next story. It's got me really hyped. This is an announcement for the development of a new game, which we really have not had a lot of that in the little past while. In the past year, I would say at least. But it does put me in this weird position because when Shadow Man was remastered and re-released as an extremely niche, you have to just admit it's a niche game. It's not one that would have been in the top 50 games that you would have expected to get a remaster, let alone a loving remaster that it actually did end up getting, that added in cut content from the original game. But I have to certainly say, if I didn't say it out loud, I definitely thought it, wouldn't it be amazing if this was something that sold well enough that you would then have a Shadow Man reboot happen. In particular, though, you are in this weird situation where Shadow Man as a comic book series basically unknown. Like, I don't even think they did re-release Shadow Man as a comic book series. So it didn't like create this situation where well, that screwed me over. You should try that, but can't try it now. So once again, we have just enough cards, and I'm really spending a lot of energy to win this one game when I could have easily just like surrendered and moved on to the next game. And you're creating a bad situation here where in the next turn this is going to cause me to lose. Unless there was something I could summon, which there isn't. So I can put that face down and make it look like a trap. But he can just win the game by putting this in attack position and attacking that. So unless he just plays incredibly defensively, almost want to say, let's call it interesting they decided to attack there for exactly the right amount of damage. I almost want to just call it here as far as Yu-Gi-Oh today. Like, since you're just playing ranked, like, you probably should put your more energy into it, but there's this weird situation here where I guess I should do one more game there, and then maybe even just do a duel live while we're at it, because I'm not particularly great at making sure we do duel lives. We'll play one more game, but then I think that's going to be it for today. So, yeah, they didn't even really re-release the comic book as far as I know, because I feel like I would have seen that. And yet they have announced now Shadow Man Dark DARQUE Legacy for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. It's an original story developed in partnership with Valiant Entertainment, so it doesn't seem like it's going to follow the events of the first game or follow any comic book. You can see by this artistic look here that the mask is gonna be more of a death mask face paint appearance. He's got these like demonic claws over his shoulders, a leather vest, and then what looks like black skin. Also noticeably here he has this silver necklace, not more of a voodoo looking necklace. Let's see if there's a Steam page already available for it. Visually, we're seeing a lot of background stuff we need to play to start with. So this is just almost like concept art that has been visually polished more. And it tells us some stuff, but not a lot. That there will be your standard horror slaughterhouse. You'll be in a swampy bayou, Mississippi, Louisiana type environment, at least at some point. And obviously the visuals are going to be basically 100 times better than what they were before. Interestingly, it's coming from Blowfish Studios, so not the people that remade the original Shadow Man game. There's going to be a cemetery section. You would think you would spend at least a significant amount of time in the hell parts, and they're not really showing those parts. This looks like this could be a hotel or a church, or even I'd say hotel, looking at the way that sofa is. But it's really just not showing you much. Let's see if the trailers may be playable somewhere else. Here you can see a better vision of what this is going to look like. They're definitely making more of this. Certainly, part of the reason why Shadow Man, I think, did not do as well back in the day is it was released, at least in part, on the Nintendo 64 in an era where Nintendo 64 games were definitely thought of as being only kids games, and so it was very weird. Notably, I bought Shadow Man at a Toys R Us and was definitely under the age of 16, and it was rated M for mature, and they didn't care one bit, or didn't even know how to check age ratings. And specifically, the teenage girl at the time that was behind the checkout cash register looked at the cover art, which was actually an embossed cover art where the face was coming up from the cardboard box of the Nintendo 64 box, and she looked at it and she goes, boy, that's creepy. That sure looks creepy. And then she sold it to me, which there's got to be at least 2 or 3 times. I can think of at least 2 times when buying Shadow Man and when stupidly buying BMX Triple X, not even realizing that it was Triple X because of the way the logo was. And those were 2 times in which I should have been said, they should have said, no, we're not selling this to you. And I imagine it's probably still very much the case, since you have a bunch of teenage employees that don't care. But also, I imagine that was also 2 times in which people probably didn't even know that they were in for mature, or what in for mature meant. And it's a sharp contrast, certainly, between a higher quality game like Shadow Man and a very low quality game like BMX XXX, as far as how much I played it. Let's watch this video. What I'm really looking for in this trailer, more than anything else, like, obviously the visuals and the audio and the platforming and the gameplay mechanics all have to be 2-3 generations better than the original Shadow Man game. But what I'm looking for is a voodoo queen lady as a character. I'm looking for enemies of some sort. I'm looking potentially for a teddy bear, which was the icon that Shadow Man used to get to the other side. And I'm looking for the jars that you had to shoot to get collectibles. And noticeably, the jars are missing. Well, I guess all of it is missing in that teaser trailer. But there definitely was a lot being teased here. As this scrolls by, you have this like band, lead belly, you have rings, you have buttons, keys, a bunch of things that very likely are items that would be used in Voodoo to transport you from place to place. Music does seem like it's going to play a big role. This giant scythe. Given a lack of any other ideas, I would have to assume that the Shadow Man character was part of a band, and then maybe the rest of the band members got killed, or they betrayed him, and now that there's some kind of revenge plot, would be what I would just have to assume. They're promising enthralling narrative, pulse-pointed horror action with enthralling character and dialogue. Now, it was a platforming game more than anything, and kind of a Metroidvania game originally. I suspect we might have a very different type of game in this new Shadow Man. Now, I am personally going to be in this weird position where I never get scared about anything, so even when I was playing Shadow Man as a much younger kid, it didn't mean anything to me. I can tell the difference between fiction and reality, which seems to be something that a lot of people cannot do. So I've never been like scared by a video game or anything like that. So should I opt to go ahead and attack like this? I guess I'll try this. Odds are pretty good that this isn't a trap you can activate. So spine-chilling horror means nothing. In the modern times, certainly you could do a lot better as far as horror. You are going to have the parallel worlds, explore detailed environments across 2 realms, creating unique gameplay opportunities. It says it's going to have punishing combat, so maybe it's going to go more in the Dark Souls direction. Challenging yet approachable and rewarding melee combat. So he may not have a gun at all, which, I mean, you are definitely changing a lot of how this game is going to play compared to the original Shadow Man game if you're not doing 3D platforming, if you don't have to get abilities to do a Metroidvania experience, and if it's melee combat. I mean, that is definitely a lot. And then it says it's going to have action-packed boss encounters. Test your mettle against monstrous demonic bosses from the darkest pits of the dead side. That was the hell. That's what they call the hell. Which, I don't think there were too many boss fights in the original Shadow Man game. This really gives me a great excuse not to play the remastered until this comes out, and then do a back-to-back comparison. That would be very interesting. See, if I activate this now, I don't think I could summon anything. Like, I don't have anything in my graveyard. Do I have a bunch of... I guess maybe I could activate it. Let's see if we can. So, if anything, this has got me hyped more than any other announcement. And I guess inherently the part of the thing here is you should be slightly more hyped around, hey, we're rebooting or continuing a very long and forgotten series, versus we're making something called Redfall that nobody knows anything about and has no connection to any nostalgia at all. Name recognition really is a big deal. Yeah, that wasn't enough to summon something particularly useful. So yeah, I am definitely hyped for Shadow Man Dark Legacy, or at least the general concept and idea of a Shadow Man Dark Legacy. In practicality, it's going to be a long time, I'm sure, before it actually comes out, and this is really just the beginning of teasing something there. If we look at Blowfish Studios, we can try and figure out what are the chances of them making a great game, because they have this game called Kroot the Winged Mystic Wings from July, and then a Winter Ember. Here, we need to special summon something, I guess. And then you have like Katie and Meowland and Kung Fu Kickball. Nine Witches Family Disruption is on my wish list. Yes, there are more. A lot of these games are not striking me as a big AAA open world experience. Like, nothing here is inspiring me with any confidence that they are the right developer and publisher to make this game. And inherently, this might be a case where Blowfish Studios has just figured out a nice end-run concept. I'm gonna run out of time if I'm not careful. Around signing a new license around the Shadow Man license that was owned by a comic book company, and getting name recognition for work that they really did not do as far as the remaster and re-release of Shadow Man. It's very possible that this new Shadow Man game comes out, or never comes out, or comes out and is actually very bad, and then it would be an interesting comparison to say, hey, this is a maybe intriguing business maneuver to have caught people's attention, but Blowfish Studios has bit off way more than they could actually chew by trying to make what would effectively be a AA 3D platforming Metroidvania game, when seemingly everything else they've ever made is a more 2.5D or 2D more simplistic game. But maybe they actually can step it up, and this is the opportunity they were looking for to expand their horizons and show off some new skills. Yeah, I think I probably lost here. And with this game, I should be done for today. Let's see, yeah. As far as games they have, you have this Crut Mystic Wings, which has only 7 user reviews from July of 2022. So it's really irrelevant as a game, and does not particularly deserve to be considered again. And then they have Winter Ember here. They're publishing quite a bit of games, but they're not the developers of some of these games. So at a certain level, you might be able to say, well, maybe they're really good developers, but then they've got this terrible side business of being a publisher that is messing up their publishing page on Steam. But I mean, you really can't cut them any slack at all on that idea, because a publisher is the one funding the development of games and deciding whether they want to publish or not. So even if they are a terrible publisher, it's still their own fault. Okay. We'll just do a direct attack here and hope that he runs out of options. But yeah, we can see Winter Ember is mixed reviewed. Katie and Meowland looks like it's a kids game, but it is very positive, so I'll give that a put it on the wish list, I guess, since it's already very positive and has 30 reviews and it's a pretty old game. But then Yestermore is mixed, and yeah, almost every one of these games is a different developer being listed. And it almost feels like what's going to happen is you'll have some developer named at a later date that is actually going to be a separate developer from Blowfish Games. Or this is really going to attempt to be their debut release with Darkman. And if there's no way that can really inspire confidence. Certainly. There's just, with no proven hit actually developed by Blowfish Studios, as far as it seems. And maybe they picked a pretty good game to make a sequel to, in the sense that nobody is going to be expecting Resident Evil 4 remake levels of quality on a Darkman sequel. Shadowman sequel. Not Darkman. Darkman's a terrible movie series. I'm running out of time here, so I'm gonna end up with just a timeout if I'm not careful. So I just need to drastically move forward. I have 80 seconds now to potentially win. And so let's not faff about at all with it. Let's just go into battle mode and attack and win. And unless he can play something, we should be done there. Interesting, a sound effect did not play there. That usually does play. So with that, that was the last daily quest there. Which means a Duel Live is about the only thing left. So Infinity Beyond the Mind looks like it might be something, but it's not really relevant enough because it has only like 13 reviews, even if it is mostly positive. And the Blowfish game's published with a different developer. Obey Me is very positive from 2020, and it is very positive at 50 reviews, so I could put it on the wish list. That being said, just looking at it though, it looks like it's mostly a top-down twin-stick shooter game that doesn't really interest me that much. And then we have Whipsy and the Lost Atlas in 2019. It's mixed from another developer. And then Storm Boy from Blowfish Studios. And maybe this is what this really boils down to. Is it would be fairly fair to say, since this is the last one that I found, or the latest one from Blowfish Studios as a developer, that this is their level of skill. And while you see a little bit of 3D here, it's really not showing much of anything. Now this is November 2018, so maybe they've hired up and they're skilled, or they've trained up and they really are ready to take it to the next step. But yeah, this is definitely not a game that could inspire a lot of confidence that Blowfish Studios as a developer would actually be the people to hire. See, the only other couple of games also are probably aren't any more inspirational. So that is a very large undertaking that they're going to have to take on. We talked about a story that said that Pokemon Go had dropped, its earnings had dropped to a 5-year low. Niantic has come back and denied that. Niantic says the claim made earlier this week was incorrect, which, alright, fair enough. Knowing video game journalism, as I think I do, it's very believable. There's probably a lot of ways you can manipulate the money so it doesn't meet that requirement. One thing I can say, though, is that I looked at Pokemon the Trading Card Game Live on Android, which it's already there, unless the live that I found is not the same live that they're going to roll out when they shut down Pokemon, the trading card game, online, the reviews are not good for Alive. So unless they've got a whole new version, whole new upgraded things, people are not happy. It's sitting at like a 2.3 or somewhere around there out of 5 stars. And it definitely feels like, at least in its early beta forms, that they made things worse, not better. So we may very well be set up to, when that transition happens, hear a lot of complaints about how Pokemon, the trading card game Live, is way worse. And you don't really have a choice because they're shutting down the old servers. Like, at a certain level, you don't need to force people to a new version of your game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Perhaps is a great example of that. In the case of Master Duel, that's different than some of the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, but you could have easily just added a new patch to the old version of the trading card game online and kept the old content and moved the server data over to new servers. So this isn't, oh, the old servers are running on an old software and thus we need to move everybody to new servers, as much as it is, oh, we've got new features and new microtransactions to sell, which is what I suspect Pokemon, the trading card game Live, is all about, really. And then Phil Spencer going on the apology tour, which is pretty much, I think, the case for everybody nowadays, apologizing for the disappointing Redfall and claims Xbox was expecting better reviews. He did actively say that they do these internal mock reviews and that the mock reviews they got were much higher, which, if anything, that just really says that their mock review system is pretty bad. A lot of times I think these mock reviews are made up of giving the games to video game journalists, mainstream video game journalists, and then the mainstream video game journalists rating it higher than they should because of the fact that they don't want to get blacklisted for game codes, or because they ignore and actively ignore the they actively ignore bugs and don't report on bugs. There's probably not anything super surprising on the shelves behind each of these videos, but there's usually something set up on the background of these shelves to hint something. It's a fairly blurry message, but we can see here this is probably the Logitech streaming device that's like $1,000 Steam Deck competitor, and that definitely implies that that Xbox is thinking more around the idea of a Steam Deck competitor. You can see a Fallout bobblehead here. You can see a big Xbox sign here. I imagine these pictures are just generic pictures. There might be something with his t-shirt. He's not particularly well dressed for an apology, which is kind of a problem. And yeah, if this was less blurry, I imagine we could see maybe some more things on this shelf. I definitely do think that the idea of online gaming and see how long this is. This is like a 41-minute kind of funny games presentation. So yeah, so he apologizes for it in this kind of funny games, which kind of funny games is, I guess, a mainstream thing. XCast, which they've done, I think, some improvement to their presentation stage compared to what they used to be, I think. Inherently, it doesn't matter though. Like, we don't want apologies. We want games that are good on launch day and not buggy and not just bad quality. And honestly, in the Redfall's case, I don't think a bugginess is as much of a problem, even though there are a lot of bugs in Redfall, as there is the fact that there's just not a good game there. Here we have another Bayonetta cosplay, which, if anything, this might be a good point to say this is the line in the sand on May 5th, 2023, in which I think most people have forgotten about Bayonetta Origins and the little girl Sorelli's spin-off game. It was, by all reception from what I saw, a decent game, but it's not knocking anybody's socks off, and I'm not seeing Platinum Games talk about it or promote it anymore. It would be very creepy and weird for a cosplayer, possibly a lewd cosplayer, to cosplay as the little girl Cereza. Anyways, so I never saw even a single cosplay around that. And that's probably a good thing, because we definitely in the past have seen Comic-Cons and things like that where parents are dressing up their kids like little sisters, which is just creepy and inappropriate, really. So we're just back to like Bayonetta, and this is a pretty good cosplay as it is. Probably green screen for the moon and the logo would be my guess, but doesn't look like a terrible green screen. I would say maybe this gun is not anywhere close to what the gun should be look like in the base here, but then the medallion looks good, the hair looks good, the ribbons look good. Black leather outfit, not showing a lot of that, and noticeably I would say, as far as this cosplay, unless this picture just got bigger, which it didn't, you're noticing that she is focused fairly heavily on the hair and the face and the glasses. And I would say that as far as prop glasses, that's pretty great too. There is really no interest here in showing the hips, the waist, any part below the bust here. Which that really screams, I really am a cosplayer trying to show off my costume design as far as the hair and the appearance of the face. If anything, they're not showing off the costume design as far as the actual leather, but in all fairness, in Bayonetta's case, her leather outfit for the most part is just hair, and it is not very detailed, so she's focusing in on the right details, in my opinion. I haven't seen a lot of cosplay lately. And then I generally don't talk about GameDeveloper.com sponsored ads, but there is definitely something in contrast to seeing a cosplayer who looked fairly attractive and this Dove ad, I believe this is Dove, calling all game developers create the heroes we need to see today. This is a sponsored article by Dove. We know what you're thinking, the brand known for its iconic beauty bar. What do they know about video games? Please allow us a moment to explain. We've teamed up with our friends in the game industry to help with the incredibly important mission. So Dove has been one of the companies that has been accused of being far too white knighty and SJW-y as far as its advertisements, and it is fairly obvious that those accusations hold weight, in the sense that you have a collection of what you would not consider traditionally beautiful women being presented here. I guess if you curve this down and realize that this lady is a mirrored version of this lady, and this is a mirrored version of this, and this is that, and this is that, then that brings the number of people down to 4, with them being in superhero costumes of some sort on the side, and just, I guess, regular clothing is what you call it otherwise. But here you, unlike even the Burger King's Kids Club, where you would have one token person in a wheelchair or a token black kid or something like that, this is 100% non-traditional beauty without really a single person in this group falling under that standard category. And I think that's a problem with a lot of these things, that just, it's so easy to say this is just woke, too woke for its own good, is the fact that the percentages are just way off. Like, for every model that is in the modeling industry, you probably have 100 arguably anorexic skinny models to every one fat model. And even in the bigger fat modeling category, you tend to have relatively skinny or closer to healthy fat models that then put on more fat suits if you want even larger sizes. This lady in particular does not come off as being a particularly healthy big size, because she has more of a spoon or ruler body shape, and that leads to very large gut here, with fairly thin thighs and ankles. So it's not just like more along an equal distribution of weight. And yeah, so this isn't even the type of model. If I was looking for a fat model, I'd do. And then you have a lady with vitiligo, who would be traditionally African American, and even in that, her vitiligo is kind of bleached, so it's not as spotty as it could be. And then you have a relatively skinny lady in a wheelchair. So then at that point you're talking, unless she had some kind of like genetic born with a disease, she probably was physically injured and wasn't originally wheelchair bound when she was born. And then you have either a short person, a dwarf or a midget, if you still use those phrases, which inherently, it really, if you don't look at the face, just kind of makes her look like a little girl. If you had 4 regular people, regular ladies, also in this screenshot, that would balance it out. It still would get the percentages totally wrong. Let's be honest, these kinds of weight itself is really not a race or a genetic condition in most cases. You might gain weight because you have a genetic condition, but being overweight itself is not a genetic condition. So it stands out as being something that is different. There's plenty of people who would say, yes, there's no reason to look down on people for being disabled or having vitiligo or being short stature, but there is definitely an argument to say that weight is sometimes, often, a choice and something you can change. Like, you cannot diet your way out of having vitiligo, or diet your way out of being wheelchair bound, or diet your way out of being of short stature. So there is a split there. But once you split that out, you're talking minority classes here that would be well below the 20% mark or 10% mark, probably closer to 5% mark. So for every like 95 traditional models you should have one of these. But yeah, it just does not, it stands out so crazily. And yeah, I'm probably rambling a little bit, but this is why people have said Dove is being ridiculous, Dove is being woke. Inherently, it gets people talking about Dove, and that's all Dove really cares about. In the end, I doubt there's anybody that's actually buying Dove soap more because of these advertisement campaigns. This is a bunch of advertisers and employees at Dove who are SJWs and don't have enough work to really do in the first place, so they are pushing campaigns like this, and now they are inherently trying to push these kinds of campaigns into video games, which that would really suck. If you made a game like this, people would make fun of it if these were the superheroes, and somewhat rightfully so. And unless that was the intention of the game developer, that really wouldn't be a good thing. It's not super crazy for one character to be somewhat disabled. And in fairness, we don't see a lot of that in video games, but it is also worth balancing out that thought in the fact that video games in particular are fantasies. We don't have fat characters, we don't have ugly characters because we don't want those characters. We don't want to look at those characters. That's not what we put in movies, that's not what we put in stories. If we're telling a narrative in our mind where you're always, it's just very natural for a human to imagine that person as being perfect and visually attractive. And so, because video games are fantasies and fictions, it is not storyline useful to have them be disabled. And it's not something people want. We saw that clearly with one of the Call of Duties or Modern Warfare, is one of those games where they tried to have a female who was missing, I believe, a leg and an arm, and was also somehow a sniper in World War II. And it just doesn't. It does not make a lot of sense to do that. Sometimes, in rare occasions, there are storyline reasons where you can write the story well enough to have somebody be disabled, and that would be fine. But this Vitiligo lady, it would likely only show up as a horror monster in a horror game, and that would not be acceptable to the woke side. A fat lady in a video game is just going to be a joke character in something like House of the Dead Overkill, and that wouldn't be acceptable. A kid's game with a lady and they had like technology in a wheelchair might work, but probably wouldn't. And then short characters have their own problem in that Steam in particular would assume a short character is an underage character. So there you run into that as an issue also. So this is immediately just like a non-starter concept being pushed by Dove, who knows nothing about video games, to game developers who are stupidly woke enough that they would actually listen to this. But you really cannot get past these visuals and say, yeah, this does not look like what you would expect in video games, and it's not going to work in video games. There's already massive pushback when you even try to make the face of Alloy even slightly chubby. It would be only more pushback any other way if Alloy was more chubby or disabled in some way. Typically, when somebody is disabled in a video game, they gain some new ability otherwise. So they lose a hand and then they gain like a robotic hand that is better. The best case scenario, I think, where you can naturally integrate something like that is probably a game like The Cat Lady, where you have a lady who is mentally depressed, and it's very clearly a fact that she's mentally depressed. And it works very much into the story. That is the whole story of The Cat Lady, really. So you touch upon it with some earnesty, and the writer had that story to tell in their mind to begin with, and thus it comes off very natural. Nobody complains that the cat lady is ugly in that game, or that she's old looking, or haggard or tired looking, because or that she's mentally depressed, because that's the character they're telling, and it's very, very natural. And noticeably, I would say also a significant amount of people who use Dove are people with like sensitive skin, so really old people and babies. And so if Dove was to say, hey, we deal with people that are really old, as far as our soap, or we deal with sensitive skin babies, why don't we see more old people, like realistic old people and realistic babies in games? Which, that's an argument that's way easier to sell, certainly, is that you almost never see a baby in a video game, and there could be babies in a video game, certainly more often, although inherently most video games are violent, so adding a baby is a dangerous idea. And we almost never see old people. You could have a realistic 50, 60-year-old character in a lot of games, and it wouldn't be that crazy. And inherently, Dove has enough money that if they wanted to make a video game, they could. So them paying to advertise to tell video gamers video game developers how to make video games is really them doing the bare minimum, when they could easily sponsor the development of a game and be a publisher of a game if they were really committed to this. But like most woke companies, they really have no commitment to what they're saying at all. They're just trying to create news press releases, and controversy helps them get press releases, and that's it. Since we're looking at Pokemon Live here, it's also worth mentioning that it's very weird that Pokemon the Trading Card Game Live is not being released on the Nintendo Switch. It's only mobile phones and PC, which it would make a lot more sense, frankly, for it to be day one on the Switch, because I think a significant amount of Pokemon fans, kids, would also be Switch bound, and they wouldn't be allowed to have a phone, and they wouldn't be allowed to be on a PC. Younger kids like that. Let's start going through the regular news now. Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2 Season 3 Reloaded have been revealed. We talked about that. New Diablo 4 livestream with details will detail seasons, cosmetics, and battle pass. This is old information. Final Fantasy 16 has been banned in Saudi Arabia. That's a new one. Square Enix was unwilling to make the required changes, rating board's claims. I wonder what the required changes are. I wouldn't be surprised if in Final Fantasy 16, since it is this kind of medieval timeline, there are a bunch of like crosses and iconographs like that, and that was the problem. Although, let's just go back. Blood, gore, partial nudity, sexual themes. What else? Strong language and violence. So any of those could potentially have been too far for Saudi Arabia. But yeah, it is nice to see Square Enix perhaps stand up for artistic creativity and saying we're not going to censor, but it's a shame to know that really they're only going to do that in countries like Saudi Arabia that are probably going to demand a lot, whereas most other ratings boards aren't going to demand as much, and they probably will be willing to make more censorship otherwise. And inherently that does just push back to the idea that Saudi Arabia, with all of its investments and its public interest fund, is willing and trying to push censorship forward, at least in its own country, and they will almost certainly try to push it forward even further globally. And that doesn't want to load. Yeah, they point that out too. The ban arrives as Saudi Arabia's public interest fund, public investment fund, is making a series of investments in the game industry. And this doesn't want to load anymore, which hopefully that doesn't mean my network's messed up on my connected wires, because that's never really been too big of a problem. So yeah, it could be any of the named sexual content, or it could be that there are some Christian icons because it's in a medieval type world. It could also be just a case that Saudi Arabia was demanding every single woman's face and hair be covered in like a burqa, and they were just like, no, we're not going to do that, and we're not going to turn every woman into a man to get around that. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Bungie has won a $12 million in a Destiny 2 cheat seller lawsuit. It's in the latest string of legal victories for the studio against cheat makers. Inherently, they're not going to see $12 million for real, but this does seem to be the standard procedure nowadays, is to sue anybody who makes a cheat, sue anybody who makes a hack tool that lets you play ROMs on a Nintendo console. And maybe the laws have been tightened up somewhat in the past decade, so it's easier to win these lawsuits, or maybe it's just more precedent is being made as they win more and more of these lawsuits. But it does seem like that is the default thing. The danger certainly here is you don't want like a 10-year-old kid figuring out some very simplistic cheat and then ending up in court and owing $12 million to a major corporation, just because they've adopted a extreme policy of suing all cheat makers. Yep, that's definitely not what you want to see happen. And in a lot of cases, that's almost exactly what always does happen, is that you have somebody who's relatively young, maybe they're 18, 19, and they end up getting sued. In the one case of the Canadian guy who is going to owe Nintendo for the rest of his life and was sentenced to actual jail time, and that jail time part is in particularly unacceptable in my point. Like, he was just like a front man. He was a salesman and advertiser. He didn't even do any of the hacks. He was just the one person who happened to be in Canada, in North America, that Nintendo could get their hands on and throw in jail. So he basically was a scapegoat. Let's see. Research firm reveals that Q1's top grossing PC and console games in the US and UK, Hogwarts Legacy was the defining game of the past quarter. Do I have a full list here? It's not particularly a great list here. Sons of Forest, Dead Space, The Sims 4, League of Legends. Valorant. This is not a good list system that they're showing me. But yeah. There were games that sold well. There were a lot of games that weren't actually good quality, though, even though they did sell well, and that's increasingly becoming a growing problem, is that people are still buying games if they are incredibly buggy, which Steam is probably going to need to put the pause or put giant warning signs when you purchase a game. I wouldn't be upset with Steam if a game is less than 50% positive, saying, hey, we're not going to give you that 2 hours, no questions asked, a refund for this game. So if you buy this, make sure you really, really want to buy it. That's not particularly fair to go down that route, but Steam needs to pop up some kind of warning of some sort to say, hey, quit buying this game. This game is poorly reviewed. You know, what they really could do with the hardware survey is say, we know your hardware for this game will not run correctly. We have examples of other players refunding the game using your exact same hardware, because I think there is this thought pattern that happens in a lot of PC gamers that they think it won't happen to them, that they have the special PC with better graphics card, better CPU, they have configured or tweaked Windows in such a way that it will run better, and all the other people who had a bad time with your same hardware just are idiots that didn't configure their computer correctly. And to a certain extent, maybe some of that is true, but probably not that much, particularly when you're talking Windows. Like, it's pretty standard. So if Valve said, look, we see you're on a Pentium 1 computer, just to use a really, really old CPU as an example, and told people, look, we know this game will not run. You do not meet the minimum specs or recommended specs of what the game is, nor do you meet the average specs that an average gamer is playing on this. You could probably save a lot of people a lot of frustration. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Apple has added 20 new Apple Arcade games, including Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle roguelike and What the Golf sequel, I guess called What the Car. What is this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle? Splintered Fate. Interesting. I wonder how many people actually play Apple Arcade, though. They don't put out enough games consistently that I would even consider it a competitor to any other service, like, or even think about it at all. In detail, all 20 of today's new Apple Arcade games. So, Cityscape Sim Builder, Disney Spellstruck, looks like it's a crosswords game or Scrabble game. Here's Splintered Fate. The thing that really comes down around this too is it's a lot of Disney stuff, I guess. Are you playing these on the Apple TV, or do you get these on iPhones and iOS, or both? Limbo Plus. It's probably just Limbo. It would be weird if there was new content there. Octodad, Dadley's Catch. Like, some of these definitely feel like they have been, would have to be merged into more of a vertical iPhone formats. Although some of them also do seem like they're somewhat widescreen in their visuals. So I have to assume it's just iPhone, iPad, and maybe Apple TV for Apple Arcade. Let's see. We already talked about Pokemon Go developer denying that its earnings dropped to a 5-year low. We already talked about Phil Spencer apologizing. If Xbox does go to like a Logitech Steam Deck type device, it really still feels like it would have to be a companion to an Xbox Series X, but I could see them abandoning a Series S cheaper device, diskless device, in favor of just a mobile device. Instead, I could see Microsoft putting in the time to have something like a Steam Deck that is just streaming video from an Xbox Series X type device and getting the best of both worlds. And I could see disc sales for still being a thing via an Xbox Series X type device, buying the disc, putting it into that tower, and then wirelessly streaming the data over to a Steam Deck type device. And yeah, they'll probably push streaming games somewhat, but in the first generation device, I wouldn't be surprised if it is much closer to a Switch, where you are mostly playing installed games still. And if Microsoft actually got all on board and tried to commit a lot of code to SteamOS and supporting SteamOS, or supporting Proton, or supporting Linux in general, then that could make SteamOS a lot better. But I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft actually just tries to make a Windows 11 or Windows 12 Steam Deck competitor, and it's still going to be heavily built around Windows APIs and backwards compatibility to Windows XP games and things like that, which they've tried that before and failed, so trying it again with a video game focus probably wouldn't succeed that well. Let's see. Xbox didn't deliver on its 2022 showcase, but Phil Spencer is enthusiastic about this year's. We're going to announce some things that people haven't seen, which I guess good. We're going to see announcements for things people haven't seen. I guess maybe this is the announcements last year, which, yeah, it'd be interesting to do a retrospective and see what was announced in 2022 and what they are specifically saying they didn't deliver on. But it is also very possible that Phil Spencer here is just falling on his sword because he's almost completely out too. And there's just going to be somebody else in charge, and then as soon as somebody else gets put in charge, they go in a different direction completely with Xbox, which a little bit of change at Xbox probably would help, particularly as far as just the internal management and making game companies that you've acquired actually make good games and not just waste Microsoft's money. But yeah, more focus on games in general might be a smart move. A little less focus on Xbox Game Pass Ultimate might be helpful. I'm not going to promote the Video Games Chronicles podcast. Let's see. Here you have something that I think is probably wrong, if I was to throw out my own opinion, in that Phil Spencer says just making great games won't change Xbox consoles' market share, which inherently I think it would, because what you have as a situation here is when there's a new generation of consoles, when the next Xbox comes out, if you have a history of Xbox doing good and making good games, and you have that positive feeling around that, then you will increase your word of mouth, which will increase more new people buying the next console. Particularly if the competitors, Sony, have a history of not enough good games. Like, you could easily make more good games than Sony or Nintendo in a year, and win on that front. Then you have Sony just not having as good as of an interface, and Nintendo not having as good of an interface or as good of a lineup. The only other option potentially here is to have exclusives, and I think that's definitely what he's hinting at, is that he thinks they just have to have exclusives, and exclusives may force a lot of people to your console, but I don't know if it's going to keep people to your console or make them happy. Maybe I'm old-fashioned in thinking that the customer should be satisfied, and maybe that's just not the way business is done these days, but that would be my thought. I feel like a lot of PlayStation players out there are only sticking around because they are locked into exclusives, and that if you took the exclusives away, they wouldn't have they would quickly probably jump to PC, or maybe even jump to Xbox. That being said, right now, as far as PC gaming, this year in particular has been particularly bad as far as buggy PC ports. So it's a bad year to say, hey, come over to the PC realm and play new games. We are still very much, because of the bugginess of PC ports this year, in a situation where you need to own a PlayStation 5 and a PC, and you can play all the old games on PC fine, but anything new, you might as well play on the PlayStation 5. Although, in fact, the truth is, most of the buggy games on PC were also buggy on consoles. The company needs to focus on the wider gaming market outside of consoles. So he's thinking mobile, PC, streaming. That's where Xbox and Microsoft are leaning towards, as far as Phil Spencer's focus. And some of that is probably true. If you could get a lot of games on mobile and own that market that doesn't really exist right now, you could get a lot more players. If you can get a few more people streaming and grow that market, that would help you. And if somehow Microsoft could beat Steam on PC gaming, or just make profit by selling on Steam, then you can get more sales that way. It is inherently a hassle to make a console when you then have to sell it for a loss. Whereas it would have been a lot nicer if there was just a standard PC spec that people made. But they don't even do that. Like, you can't get the APUs and the type of RAM and all that information. They don't release that information where somebody could go and build a PC and say this PC is within standard of what an Xbox Series X is, so it should play an Xbox Series X equivalent PC game the same way. And we don't even get to that point. Like, PCs probably should have some standards as far as just whether or not a computer can pass or fail on specific requirements. Let's see, the Epic Games Store next free title has been announced. The Sims 4 The Daring Lifestyle bundle will replace this week's free games. What are this week's free games? Not sure. They're listing them, so I'll have to check that. Lego 2K's Drive Pass has been detailed with a year of content to come. Seasons won't be time limited, so players can beat them on their own pace, which that sounds nice, but inherently this Lego 2K Drive Pass game already seems to have lost my attention because of what looks like a massive amount of microtransactions and just monetization that it's going to try and have. And inherently, if the Lego TT games are actually minifig games, this game mostly seems like it is just a racing game with Lego skins on it and nothing else. I just don't think that there's too much Lego in this Lego game. And that might be the future, is that we will see skinned versions of Lego games, or kids games that have Lego skins over them, but really don't have much to do with Lego. Otherwise, overall, if this wasn't so crazily monetized, though, or it didn't seem like it was crazily monetized, I would have a lot more faith in Lego 2K's Drive. Let's see. Apparently dozens of Apex Legends bugs have been fixed by a single line of code, solving the issue like finding a needle in a haystack, according to Respawn. Which, that's, as a programmer or someone who was classically trained as a programmer, then that seems to me like just bad coding. A single line of code being called in a way that's creating dozens of bugs, and yet you don't recognize that that's the central point where all these bugs are coming from, is that they're calling the same function over and over again. Yeah. I'd actually like to see what the single line of code is. It could also be a case that the single line of code might have been a super long single line of code, and it should have been broken into multiple lines of codes to fix it, or to simplify what each line does. That's why when you're coding, particularly if you're collaboratively coding, but even just to remind yourself, you should probably have at least one comment for every line of code, explaining to yourself what that line of code is supposed to do. This might very well have been an off by one error. But inherently, also, a single line of code creating dozens of bugs probably means just visual glitches and not major, this is going to crash the whole game type mistakes. And so there might be a lack of value in fixing that single line of code and those dozens of bugs. It's also very easy, I think, to have QA people make redundant bug reports, and if you don't have a director, manager of the QA reports team merging different bug reports into one, it's very easy to say, hey, this bug report is different than this bug report because each QA person is getting paid per bug report, or they're required to make a certain number of bug reports per day, so they're just cheating the system effectively and making duplicate bug reports. And so a dozen bug reports could be treated like it's a dozen bugs when really it was one bug put in by a dozen different employees, or one employee a dozen times. A 2-hour Zelda Breath of the Wild orchestral concert is available to view online. The concert is presented by the Japanese Orchestra Assembly GAP. Feel like this is probably something that happened a while ago. April 22nd. That's not that long ago. So check out Video Games Chronicle if you want to check that out. Bungie is raising Destiny 2's Season Pass prices beginning this month with the Season of the Deep. As somebody who's never played any of Destiny 1 or Destiny 2, I don't understand why so many people are still playing Destiny. But inherently, I guess it is just the closest thing to a modern Halo game that you got. And if you are a Halo bro that loved Halo games, or if you're just a Halo fan that loves Halo games, then Destiny 2 really is the place for you. And if that's the main game you're playing, or the only game you're playing, then I could see why you're sticking to it. In the same way, I really don't understand why people would still be playing World of Warcraft at this point. We already talked about the new Shadow Man game. I'm personally very hyped around that, although I am fairly underhyped based on the publisher. It's the third game based on the comic, which was originally published in 1992 and has since sold 5 million copies. Interesting. What was the first game? Maybe there was a Shadow Man game before Shadow Man 64. That's interesting. I'm going to have to research that to figure out what the first Shadow Man game was. Or if they're technically saying that the remaster of the first Shadow Man 64 was the second game. That is also a possibility. Let's see. The standalone version of Spider-Man Remastered is out now for the PS5. If you want to check that out on the PS5. Carl Urban is reportedly in talks to play Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat 2 movie, which I don't know how many different voices this guy can do that he would be a decent Johnny Cage. Like, he's pretty good in The Boys playing that one character, which it almost feels like it might have been a character designed for him. But Johnny Cage feels like he should be perhaps a little bit more high energy, a little bit more Hollywood, clean shaven. And there's stunt casting here, but this is for a movie, so you would stunt cast for a movie. I would be much more concerned if all of a sudden he gets in the Mortal Kombat 2 movie, and then he is also getting face scanned as the new Johnny Cage in the Mortal Kombat 12. That would be concerning to me. But we have no indication that that's what's going to happen. Let's see. Hogwarts Legacy is getting an arachnophobia mode and 500 fixes as it hits the PS4 and Xbox One. I don't know if you really need an arachnophobia mode in games, but whatever. Seems like this is a standard thing, and if I was to at least, it seems like it's becoming very standard to have arachnophobia modes. In this case, it seems like it's removing the legs and giving them skates instead, and making it all red and cartoony. At the very least, compared to like the Dove, let's include or make all the superheroes disabled or overweight women, I would say there's almost certainly a higher percentage of arachnophobia sufferers, people there with like real severe arachnophobia that play video games, than there are people in any of those one individual classes, like people in wheelchairs or people with dwarfism or midgetism, or with Allegro, is that the word? Abstergo. It's I forget the word. I'm not saying the right word there. Alopecia maybe is the word. Particularly in the case of alopecia, I don't know if there's a significant amount of people at all that think alopecia is pretty, even if you have it. I think most people that have it wish they wouldn't have it, for multiple reasons, because it also doesn't just give you blotchy white patches. It tends to lose all the oils in your hair and make your hair dry and crackly. So yeah, and there's plenty of overweight people that don't want to be depicted and don't consider being overweight an attractive visual thing too. So it really comes down to an interesting question: how many of these special needs or minority groups actually even want to see themselves represented in games? But yeah, I could see where arachnophobia mode, even though I think it's silly at that point, and you're really just accommodating people in fantasy far too much. I don't expect, if I was to go and watch a horror movie in the theaters, that they would give me special glasses upon request that would blacken out all the horror or all the gore, or anything like that. You just have to realize that reality is reality. In arachnophobia, for instance, spiders exist. Most spiders are harmless. Get over it. Learn it. If you're hysterical and crazy, get therapy on your arachnophobia. You can be very, very safe around most spiders, and you can be safe around even dangerous spiders by staying far away from them and outside of their habitats. It's hardly like there is a predator out there, spiders, snakes, or even wolves, that actively will chew through a wall to get to you, and that we have to sleep with hunting rifles under our beds. Even in Australia, it's not that extreme. Let's see. Moving on, Hogwarts Legacy has topped 15 million sales and grossed over $1 billion in income gross. Seagate has cut the price of the Xbox Series X and S storage cards. The 512, 1TB, and 2TB discount prices are discounted in the US, but UK prices have yet to be adjusted. I bet the prices still are fairly expensive. Like 512 gigabytes in 2020 for $140. It's quite a lot. And they definitely were making a lot of claims that it was very fast storage, but I'm not sure that we really even I'm not sure we've really seen a big improvement in loading on the Xbox Series X with its fast storage cards compared to the PlayStation 5 and just putting in an NVMe SSD, because all of these expansion storages really are not used by most people anyways, because you still have the internal storage that's fast. So now 512 gigabytes is $90 from $140. 1 terabyte is $150 from $219, and 2 terabytes is $280 from $400, and that's still pretty expensive, and not in line with what you could get as far as a U3 high-speed micro SD card, which maybe the speeds are a lot faster than that compared to micro SD, but micro SD would be a lot more reusable later on and in more devices. Or you probably are better comparing this to like a Gen 4 NVMe SSD, which, yeah, for $90 you'd almost certainly get. 1 terabyte, if not 2 terabytes of space there. And I would also say Microsoft loses a few people by having proprietary connectors, when really Microsoft should be our Xbox is as close to a PC as it could be, and that you should be able to just put in an NVMe stick fine. And it's odd that PlayStation allows you to do that, where PlayStation in the past has had the Sony proprietary MEM sticks and focused on that a lot more. So they've almost done a full 180, both of them, and in the end it just screws over the consumers, as very few people, I imagine, even would want to or need to buy these. You can still plug in a USB hard drive, which is the better move, and archive to the hard drive instead of trying to expand your playable memory so you can have multiple games installed. Now we're on our Gamatsu articles, and we don't have too many of those. The MMO RPG Chrono Odyssey gameplay reveal trailer screenshots are available. It's also been confirmed for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Gun Vein for Switch launches May 11th. Looks like a shoot 'em up game. Jagged Alliance 3 launches this summer, and it has a physical tactical edition announced. Jagged Alliance is a strategy game, I guess, from the tags. Seems like this entire teaser trailer is just going to show off the physical limited edition and not show any actual gameplay. So I'm going to assume that this is a positional placement turn-based combat experience from THC, which we are seeing THC Nordic all of a sudden start to announce some new things after what was a fairly long time in which they didn't announce anything. Cow the Kangaroo DLC Bin the Rulies is now available. The base game is free via the Epic Game Store until May 11th. Is this a THQ Nordic game also? No, it isn't. Bugsnax is coming to iOS this summer, which Bugsnax really wasn't a game that I thought could have been ported to iOS, but we might increasingly see that it gets easier and easier to port even like middle tier graphic games to smartphones. And once that gap really gets filled in, and we start to see indie games and single A and double A games come to cell phones, the AAA games, which often are buggy and not even that good, may hold less of a stranglehold on the gaming industry, and we might see an era in which we move towards more AA and single A games once again, which would be better, frankly. The failure of putting everything into one AAA game over and over again, and only having one out of every 5 or 6 of those actually sell and be good, that really isn't the way the industry should be run. It's turning, people are using the Hollywood mentality where they want to make summer blockbuster movies that make all the money, when really they need to make games consistently that are more like just, this is a good weekend movie. It's not going to be great. It's going to make a few million over what it cost us, but it's not going to sell billions of dollars. Gamatsu also has the Lego 2K Drive Pass details. Here you can see it. Its image is a little bit bigger. I'm not going to bother to read it though. The Dark Pictures anthology Man of Medan is now available for Switch. This would have been one of the older Dark Pictures anthology games. Yeah, 2019 is when it came out on Steam. but I'll make another YouTube short around it. Well, actually, this will be the first for sure. Amnesia the Bunker has 10 minutes of gameplay if you want to check that out on Komatsu. Shadow Man Dark Legacy, we talked about that already. Remnant 2, The World of Loathsome Fae trailer is available. Remnant 2 coming soon. Put it on the fall list. I really have gotten to this point though where I'm saying the same thing over and over again as far as I need to change my macro, and then I don't ever think about it as soon as I'm at the end of the stream, so I don't know what to do to remind myself. Inherently, at the end of every one of these streams, I'm either running to the bathroom or running to eat food or falling asleep. So I'm just so mentally exhausted. Here we can see Remnant 1 is very positive, and it's already on my wish list. So Remnant 2 potentially is going to be interesting. Harmony The Fall of Reverie launches June 8th for the Switch and PC and June 22nd for the PS5 and Xbox Series. This is from Don't Nod Entertainment. Feels like it's kind of visual novel-y with some slight gameplay element to it. Also, Ludo Narracon. That phrase Ludo narrative, there's another word after it. I think it was a phrase that frankly was somewhat helpful for a brief second as putting a word to a feeling, but at this point I feel like it's just become a sales pitch that a lot of game developers use, and very much a concept that may not be understood by a lot of people using it too. Ludo narrative dissidence is the third word there, in the sense that you have the game telling you that a character is feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way, and then when you actually control the character, they act in a completely different way. A great example is that you'll have like a hero character saying, I don't want to hurt people, I don't want to fight, and then the game gives you 20 hours of you doing nothing other than beating up and hurting people. So half of this trailer says it's supposed to be a gameplay trailer. Seems to have really been just a visual trailer. Yeah, at a certain point it seems like this is just straight up maybe a timed branching story visual novel. Maybe you just play it multiple times. Maybe there's a roguelite element to it where going through these branches of the narrative does something. Or maybe there's some randomness as to what these are, and these aren't story branches. What this does look like is it might be an interesting way to present a visual novel, which they're not calling it a visual novel, but boy does it feel like a visual novel to me. But to potentially just present, here are the branches, here's the interface. I've seen that in other visual novel games where it's very helpful to have a chart telling you how this is breaking up. Whereas many visual novels don't show you a chart of the branches, and you just would have to use a walkthrough to potentially figure out all the different endings or branches, if it really matters to you. Moving on, Hogwarts Legacy sales topped 15 million. I think we talked about that. Operation Wolf Returns first mission VR has been announced for the PSVR 2, the Quest 2, and the Pico 4. I have no idea what the Pico 4 is. Like, the only Pico I know is the Raspberry Pi Pico, as far as a programmable microcontroller. But it certainly wouldn't be that, because Raspberry Pi Pico is in no way powerful enough to do VR. It could be used as part of other circuitry in a VR headset, but it wouldn't be the main processor. Raspberry Pi Pico would almost certainly not be able to even do graphics at all. Let's see. And then PlayOn is going to merge Deep Silver, Prime Matter, and Raven's Court under a single brand, though you may still see titles published by each brands over the next couple of years. So Deep Silver is like the only title there that I even recognize. Maybe I've seen Raven's Court, but I couldn't tell you any games made by Raven's Court, although in fairness I'd struggle to tell you what even Deep Silver has done. PlayOn, not particularly any better. So, interesting. Few recent and upcoming titles by each brand. Deep Silver has no upcoming titles, but they did release Dead Island 2 and Saints Row. I guess that's a remake and chorus. So I could see why you wouldn't use Deep Silver. Prime Matter is releasing a game called Echoes of the End, Painkiller, and Payday 3, and System Shock, which I didn't know they were doing any of those games. And then so far they've released Maddo Anomaly, Scars Above, Gungrave Gore, The Chant, The Last Aura Crew, and Dolmen. And then Raven's Court is releasing a game called Kona 2 and Proto Corgi, and so far they've released Road 96 Mile 1 and Road 96, that's actually Mile 0, not Mile 1. So what I think this really is the case is Deep Silver basically screwed up on Saints Row Reboot, and Dead Island 2 is good but not good enough to keep the name Deep Silver around. And so, in a way of internal protectionism, they are getting rid of Deep Silver by sacrificing Prime Matter and Raven's Court's title too, and just putting it all under the PlayOn name, which hopefully they're hoping will have better search returns than if people search Deep Silver and see complaints around the Saints Row game. And I wouldn't be surprised if inherently the team at Deep Silver is secretly getting shuffled around or fired, and that there will just be a decent amount of people from Deep Silver as side that do get fired or laid off and or get put in different teams. Generally, simplistically thinking, it would make a lot of sense whenever there is a merger for it to instantaneously be the default that all companies under that merger lose their name and all the different divisions get merged together into one big company, and everything just works better because you have more people all working towards the same goals. But that's not really how video games work. In fact, very often you'll have a company like Deep Silver, and then you'll have multiple companies or teams under that title that are pretending to be under that same banner when they really are in their own separate banners. I think that's part of the problem with Redfall and Arcane Austin in particular, is that I suspect that Arcane Austin, or whoever is at Arcane Austin at this time when Redfall was being developed, is not the same team that worked on say, Dishonored or even Prey or Prey Moon Crash. Okay, let's do some Flawless cleanup. Here we have Escape Underground, which is not relevant, so we can remove that. And then we have Escape Underground again, which we can ignore. Escape Memoirs, Mansion Heist. Is this a VR game? Let's see. Cooperative atmospheric reverse escape room puzzle game. Can you play it in single player? I don't. It says you can. Let's do the research here. Seems like it's very focused on co-op enough that the single player aspect. It says play together or work solo with friends in up to 5-player multiplayer. So pick your friends or 4 and go heisting together. So I guess the general idea is that you're stealing stuff while solving puzzles. It's received well. It says it has a single player aspect. I'll put this on the wish list. I probably won't have as good of an experience around it than compared to people that would play with friends. That is something that YouTube gamers seem to prove fairly well, even there, is that while you do have game grumps in which 2 people are on mic while 1 person is playing most of the time, there aren't a lot of streamers or gamers out there that can consistently get 3 or 4 people playing at the same time. Even Captain Sparkles with his Minecraft multiplayer events are fairly infrequent, and that just comes down to time management and how much time you have to spend making content. Let's see. Escape Halloween Forest. This is from November 2022. I think at this point we can say it's not going to be relevant and remove that. Escape from Zombie U Unloaded. This is the adult game that I put on the wish list, or the fall list, which inherently I just put it on the fall list, and it's definitely going to be a landmine, although not that much of a landmine because there actually isn't any, I think, nudity in any of these screenshots for an adult game. So far, it has 12 reviews and positive. I think that one in particular might be, as an adult game, somewhat interesting. And we've seen a couple of games in the adult section that actually feel like games and aren't just trying to sell on being super simplistic gameplay mechanics to get to a small collection of nude scenes, which is the vast majority of adult games, is that they're just super simplistic visual novels or match 3 games to get to the nudity. This Escape from Cronus X doesn't have enough reviews, so we'll get rid of that. Escape First Alchemist. Solo or co-op? I really question how many of these escape games I would really want to do. It would be easy to play some of those. Escape Academy would be the main one to play, certainly, because it is way more relevant. I could play a lot of these games in contrast to games like Myst and say, here's the more modern take on that general idea, where you get a little bit further away from believability in favor of opening up a world where you can have more puzzles and challenges. Myst in particular has to bend over backwards to justify the existence of so many puzzles. Escape Abstraction here. I'm going to give this more time, but it's probably not going to get reviews. And then here we have Cthulhu Death Escape, which I don't know specifically why this would have come up when we were going through the letter E's. Seems like this is a prototype of a game anyways from 2022, and just because it's a prototype it should leave the fall list. Let's see, so that's literally one YouTube short to make so far. GameDeveloper.com articles, we have about 10 of those now. Barbie fashion designer in The Last of Us joined the Video Game Hall of Fame. I feel like that was old news. They had already said they were going to do that. So, seems like GameDeveloper.com is just really late to the party, several weeks late. 5 lessons from history of making Star Wars games. This was May the 4th be with you. I didn't see a lot of May the 4th Star Wars sales. Like maybe some Lego Star Wars sets were on sale, but that was about it. Star Wars Day as a holiday really fails when there's not anything from Disney coming from that aspect, when obviously every May 4th should be the day to release something in theaters, even if it was just to say, hey, we're going to put the episode 1 back in theaters or something like that. Like inherently what you would want to do is at least have a 3-movie marathon of episode 4, 5, and 6 in whatever format you can release it as. There is some speculation that the remasters are not publishable unless you pay George Lucas's wife, and that's why he made the remasters, was to just like screw his wife out of residuals, which I don't know if that's really true or not. It seems a little far-fetched. I believe more into the thought that George Lucas is just a lunatic that thinks the remasters are better. Speaking of which, Steven Spielberg even came back out recently and said it was a mistake to edit out the guns in E.T. and turn them into flashlights. So we may see Disney release the original versions or a new remastered versions without any additions or arbitrary edits. But if I was Disney, I definitely would have some movie on May the 4th in theaters every year. If not that, then Disney Plus should be doing something a lot better, having a sale to get Disney Plus. Disney Plus not really trying to get new subscribers, it seems like. Anyways, from this article, they say to sell Force Powers, you need adaptive ragdoll. Let's see. Disney Star Wars Galaxy Edge theme park attractions makes the most of RPG design mechanics. To revive the Star Wars flight sim, EA Motive built an incredible focus testing tool. This really seems like this is just several articles being merged together that have Star Wars in the name. Star Wars Jedi Survivor explores player expression. Yep. So this is really just a listicle trying to get you to click on more Star Wars articles from GameDeveloper.com. And arguably they didn't say anything about the Lego Star Wars game, so this is a collection of images that don't even really connect. We already talked about Final Fantasy 16 being banned in Saudi Arabia. I don't think that they have any more details as to what specifically was the problem, though. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a rumor or something that isn't even true, and that we come back on Monday and we find that Final Fantasy 16 has not been banned in Saudi Arabia. That often happens when you start to cross the line to a different language, and then you just aren't familiar with who is who. Blue check marks on Twitter certainly aren't going to be helpful as far as whether somebody is a real authority or not. Plus, in many countries, like, it's very possible for somebody to say something, somebody in the government to say something is banned and then somebody above them to unban it the next day or so. That there aren't that much of a clear procedure, or that there isn't a way to bribe somebody above that person to get it unbanned. We already talked about Riot paying over 1,500 women as part of a gender discrimination settlement. Respawn talking about a single line of code was behind an elusive audio bug. So it was an audio bug. I guess they go into a little bit more detail. If anything, skimming over this, it really just makes me think that the programmers aren't as good as they should be. And inherently, this is a terrible, terrible article for any game company to say, hey, we found a single line of code that fixes a bug, because it should never be a single line of code, or you shouldn't admit it's a single line of code. You should say, actually, it was this complicated convolution of dozens of lines of code that no human could possibly have ever found, but we, the superhuman programmers, were still able to figure out this bug and solve it. We're really good at coding, we promise. Don't hate us, don't lose faith in us. Particularly in a professional environment, but generally just in life, you shouldn't admit weakness. It's a dog-eat-dog world, even if you don't think it is. So, yeah, a lot of times it is just better and safer to lie and say something was more complicated than it is, than admit, oh, I just made a stupid off by one coding error, or I messed up a single line of code. Let's see. Tango Gameworks Ghostwire Tokyo has haunted 4 million players, and arguably we might get to a point where, as far as the ZeniMax group of games, Ghostwire Tokyo might be the best selling and least buggy of them all for 2023. We'll see if Starfield comes out this year and how buggy that game is. You basically have to hope at this point that Starfield is 100% bug-free and an amazing game, and that all of the effort of Microsoft and Xbox has been focused on making Starfield bug-free and a great game, and then we can just blame all the other problems of every other game on the fact that they were secretly all polishing Starfield. You would hope you could make that argument. It's not really believable that people at Double Fine were actually working on Starfield and doing QA for them or anything like that, but it would be the last excuse Microsoft could use for a long run of bad games from them. In all fairness, though, it's not like Sony's putting out a lot of games at all, so Sony is, I guess, doing the right thing and just reducing or slowing down their releases, or not releasing anything in general, whereas Microsoft is putting out releases, but then they're terrible. We already talked about Steam developers now being able to search by developer, franchise, and tag. They definitely should probably crack down on how many tags there are. Generally, in a searching database way, you'd want an infinite number of tags, as many tags as possible, but then there is also just a lack of use. If only one game out of the 300,000 games on Steam or so has that one tag, it's not that useful. And you have to kind of know and tell the player, the searcher, what the tags are. And then we talked about Destiny 2's Season Pass price increase coming around. So let's look at the new games. We have an RPG Maker game called Project X that looks like nothing. We have a game called Fat Sheep Crisis, which doesn't look interesting enough. We have a game called Psionic Awake, which doesn't look interesting enough. We have a game called On the Other Side. Is this a card-based game in any way, or is this just an asset flip horror game? I'll give it a chance. Dream Fight Will. I'll give it a chance. It doesn't really catch my attention. Never Home Hall of Apathy. It might be something to this, or it might just be an RPG maker. First adult game for this Friday. Sexy Memory Puzzle. Spanking Girls. So it's 3D CGI ladies in leather and lace. One spanking with their hand, it seems, the other girl. Spanking as a fetish is, in my opinion, a little bit weird. And the match 2 part on this is actually pretty bad, and is just numbers. So you flip over a card and it says a number, and then you have to match that, and then as you make the matches you see the background image, of which there may only be 3 or 4 images. But particularly, like, Spanking as a Fetish is somewhat violent, and it's fairly wide because you can get into whipping with whips, and you can use paddles or hands, and in a lot of ways it's a fetish that's probably just a thing, an accessory, I guess would be the word to use, onto bondage, sadism, and masochism. Mostly sadism and masochism would be the focus there, as far as enjoying inflicting pain or receiving pain. But, you know, spanking is definitely safer than choking. But if you specifically had just that fetish and no bondage and nothing else like that, then that's a little weird too. It says there's, in this game, 12 different images, and it's selling for 69 cents, so the price is low. But I don't think you're really getting a lot there. Particularly, I'd say also, for the spanking fetish, you probably want sound effects and motion. And that is something you're not going to get in still 3D CGI images. So that's a pretty low effort adult game. But the price is right, so can't complain too much. Inherently, because there's such a small collection of competition as far as adult games coming out every couple days, it's really hard to say something that even like that was fairly low quality is so low quality that it doesn't deserve to be on Steam or shouldn't be listed at all. Like, the bar and the quantity needs to be raised severely as far as adult games before you could say, alright, we have enough to satisfy anybody who is actually looking for that type of game. And you can see that even in the best-selling adult games, I think we'll say no to this, in the fact that Mirror, as one of the best-selling adult games, is still one of the best-selling adult games years later. This next adult game is called Sweet Beach Holidays, which it's a more flat style, although it still seems like it's a little bit 3D, but colorful, kind of anime girl with big boobs. She seems like you just kind of pose them based on cards. So it's almost like a card game to get the anime girl undressed or posed in certain ways. I wouldn't say the animation is particularly great on here, but the card game might be somewhat interesting. as a way of getting towards the adult content. It's $4.09 though, and it says it has 3 unique 3D girls and 18 card levels, and then it says it has 36 adult real-time CGs. So there's perhaps a lack of polish here. It has Japanese full audio, and then English and Chinese subtitles. And while you do seem like you're playing cards to get points, it doesn't seem like the actions when you're playing the cards actually lead towards different reactions so much. So what you have like a card that would increase the pleasure of the lady, and then you drag the card to are you going to use it on her like breasts or lips or genitals as far as that card. So you're raising up a stamina bar, but there isn't an instant reaction, it feels like, to playing a card as much as it's just them writhing around in pleasure as they're being massaged. It's an interesting thought for gameplay. Arguably maybe not visually polished enough and maybe not varied enough, but I want to put it on the fault list and just see what people have to say about it. Increasingly, I am interested in seeing if there's a fandom there, if they review games. How big the fandom is would be a nice metric too. Rebound gun here doesn't look interesting. And certainly, at least these adult games catch my attention, whereas I've just been bored out of my mind around most of these lower quality non-adult games where it very often is just the exact same thing over and over again. A top-down twin-stick shooter type experience. I guess I'll make YouTube shorts around prologues, but I'm not going to put them on the fault list. Spiritless is a weird looking point and click adventure game. Puzzled Runner. Titans Pinball. Give that a follow. And here we have yet another adult game called Lockdown 2024. These are 3D CGI characters, more realistic style. Bunch of ladies, pre-rendered models. But weirdly, it is claiming to be a point-and-click adventure game. And if anything, it kind of looks like it's a stealth game or a collection of mini games. There's a lock-picking mini game here. A basketball looks like a basketball mini game. Massages. So I'm really questioning just if there's a consistent gameplay mechanic or if there's just several mini games. Point and click adventure, I think, is probably a stretch for what it really is. Although it could be that. But then it's a point and click adventure around the premise of being locked down with 7 women for a year in the same house, and that just doesn't make a lot of sense. $12.99 makes it feel like it's probably too expensive. Plus, it's still running into the problem of these like pre-made assets, and let's just show this off as far as just like the body proportions on a lot of these characters seem to often be off, and it's just pre-made models. So you have like giant breasts and giant butt here. It's just really not the most visually appealing as far as the proportions. This one looks like she's got either ribs or gills or just awkward wrinkles in her shirt. So yeah, having 7 girls in a game is perhaps not the smart move when you could have 2 or 3 girls They look a lot better. And you would think that these pre-made characters in practical application would look a lot better, but they just don't, because it is getting to that uncanny valley point where you would do a little bit better if you went more with a cartoony style and polished it visually that way. Otherwise, you're going to have to put a lot more effort to polish something visually to make it hyper realistic in its art style. Here how we know we're live is a pixely walking simulator. I'll give that a follow. And then here we have yet another adult game called Level Up with the Gamer Girls. And in this case, it is very much still a little 3D in its angles, but more 2D anime girls. It is an adult game, it says, but none of the screenshots are actually showing any adult content. So I guess I can show it off. As far as I can tell, the game may very well just be clicking on things like this, and then every other screenshot here is probably just a narrative screenshot. You've got these anime gamer girls all in different poses playing games. But yeah, I suspect the actual game is just clicking on things flying in the foreground over and over again. So it doesn't really feel like it's much of anything. 84 cents. Notice no Asian languages in the top 5 languages here. English, French, German, and Spanish instead. The not safe for work content is as DLC, which then makes an argument: why have an adult section and break it into not safe for work content? Why not just straight up have it? Well, I mean, I guess it's better to have more options than less, so. And I suspect it is very much a case that Steam is just pushing more games to be in the adult only section. But one would assume that if you're playing this game without the NSFW content installed, then it would not be adult only content. But yeah. In the game, your goal is to cut the items to win the level in order to restore the picture. So it is basically Fruit Ninja, but with anime gamer girls of some sort. And visually, I wouldn't even say these are drawn particularly great. And then we get the exact same thing, possibly because of the DLC, or possibly just because of glitches. I don't know why I'm actually getting double clicks on links these days. Really shouldn't be happening. Bottle is a very short game where you play an alcoholic man of solitude. Walking simulator. I think we can say no to that then. The Outer Rim doesn't look like it's enough of anything. The Doomed Isles, the First God. Might be something to that. Exxon doesn't look like anything. I commissioned some dogs too, as far as hidden object games. Should I reward these people who are making hidden object games this often? No, because this is like $3.40 and there's 15 pictures here. That's way too expensive. I don't want to reward that. Just Survive looks like garbage. Retro Causality looks like an adult game, but apparently it's just a visual novel. It's just they've got the name as Buy, B-U-Y. English says it's full audio. I wonder if that's really the truth. Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in this game. I don't believe that this is actually full audio and voiced lines of dialogue, because if it was, then as a visual novel, they would have put way too much effort into it. And then you look at the visuals and it just doesn't look like that's the case. Feels like these are all just been pre-purchased or downloaded models from some other game. The backgrounds don't match the foreground characters' art styles in any way. So I'm going to say no to that. And then this Garden of Ban. Looks like it's some kind of joke troll game that's already mixed. Then Dead Pedal is too much red sand for its own good. Absolute Scat for Windows 11. I hope we don't see a trend of games saying for Windows 11, as they are potentially going to start hinting at a Windows 12. Although I don't know if a Windows 12 is going to be any better than a Windows 11. Almost certainly they're not going to go backwards. And so any problems you have with Windows 11 are likely to still be around in a Windows 12. Little Bo Reap. That's an interesting word pun. Slime Knight. I'll give it a chance. Increasingly, though, we're not seeing a lot. Particularly non-adult games. Like today, I have not seen a single non-adult game that caught my attention whatsoever. The thing that caught my attention by far was a Darkman new game, and even that I'm withholding a lot of optimism just because I know I investigated who was actually publishing and developing that new Darkman game. Let's see. This feels like this is an adult game, but it's not in the adult section. That's weird. And it doesn't have any mature content. So it's just called Essential Power. And it seems like it's 3D CGI girls. But they've gone the route of staying outside of the adult section. And instead just being kind of lewd looking or provocative looking as a cheap visual novel that they're selling for way too much. Way too much. Almost certainly a game like that would sell better with adult content in it. But maybe not. Maybe just getting in front of more eyes is a better way, better tactic. I'm not sure anybody knows, and I think that is where we're getting. Here you have Telltale Games and Telltale Games, but this Telltale Games, I think Telltale Games UK is not Telltale Games from the US. Let's investigate that more. Yeah, this publisher Telltale Games UK has only this one game on Steam. Search term or tag. See, there'd be no way to actually know what tags to search for. And by default, search is just going to push you to the biggest games ever. Let's check Resident Evil 4 since we're here. Overwhelmingly positive? No problems? Okay, good. Good to know. Why is Resident Evil 4 not on my wish list? I have no idea. It definitely should be. So this Camelot 2, the Holy Grail, even if you were to try and get it, you probably wouldn't get Camelot 1 on Steam, or you'd have a hard time finding it. Let's see, That Potato Game. I'll make a YouTube short on it, just because I'm a little short on YouTube Shorts after messing up and losing a bunch. But noticeably, a lot of these games are not getting follows. Escape from Russia Mobilization as an infinite runner doesn't interest me. Sea of Choices. I'll give this a chance, but it probably doesn't deserve it. Banana Guy as a platformer. I'll give this a chance, but it probably doesn't deserve it. And then an Idleness in Inferior. Noticeably, also, we didn't have any visual novels announced from Gamatsu. Oh, this is an adult section game, isn't it? It's a boys love guy on guy visual novel. I didn't even scroll down enough. $8.09, English only. Again, I'd like to see more reviews around those games to just see, well, is there an audience there? Is that something people are interested in, or that at least a certain percentage of people are interested in? I suspect there should be more people interested in those kinds of games, but maybe they just aren't that into video games in general. But we shall see. I guess in the long run, eventually we'll figure it out. Anyways, I guess it was not that much news today, and definitely not that much Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, so we're finishing a little early, which gives me more time to work on other things. Lego DC Supervillains, I'm going to have to power through that, certainly. And then scheduling videos, I'm sure. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.